I don't want to run the risk of repeating stuff people have already said. It's difficult not knowing what people have already said, right? I was trying to... last week, I was in an NUT meeting, my local association. I was proposing a motion opposing the form of baseline which is proposed to be introduced in 2016. And it provoked some interesting discussion. Unexpected, interesting discussion. Because I said to these NUT colleagues, you know, I want to propose this motion. We had the discussion around why I thought it would be unhelpful and damaging, as I'm sure you've heard from Jess and Richard, to introduce anything like a formal test for 4-year-olds at entry into school, and we can talk more about that in a minute. Well, I had these colleagues in my local association, much respected colleagues, including a very good NUT head, who said in response, no, we actually quite want this test. Just wait, Jess, just wait. It's good though to have these debates and to try and work out why. And I think, this is what I want to talk about for a minute. We want these tests. You're not going to like this. They're used. A phrase was used which will horrify. But the context is the school that these particular colleagues came from is in a. There's a lot of wards that claim to be the most deprived ward in the south of England. I know there are. But it is one that claims to be. Whether it is or not, I don't know. But it's a ward of an area with very challenging circumstances. And they said, we want this test so that we can demonstrate, I'm going to use the phrase that was used, how thick the kids are when they come in.
Oh no.
Now why? Why? Why was that phrase used? Without wanting to cast aspersions at these colleagues, it seems to me that part of the thinking around this was, well, look, our whole life's work in this school is about demonstrating our value added, the value that we can add to these children by virtue of our education. And the school, for what it's worth, the school that these colleagues came from, is judged as outstanding. It's judged as having incredibly good results given the nature of the area which it serves. And these colleagues thought it was all to the good if they could show the distance travelled between the entry of the kids into their school and the end of Key Stage 1. Lots of the kids coming into their particular school, I say lots, some of the kids coming into their school, like in plenty of other areas, coming in nappies, coming in with dummies. Most not able, no, but I make a claim which you might consider rash, not only not able to use a knife and fork, but never having held a knife and fork at all, the knife and fork required to cut up that free school meal. Right? Now, here are colleagues who want to demonstrate, look what we've got to deal with. For right or wrong. So we go into the discussion. And the discussion centred upon, actually, they'd misunderstood what was being tested. Actually, these colleagues thought that their work was going to be valued more, or there was going to be some recognition of the value that they would add to these children's lives by the kind of work, essential work, that they were doing in those early years. Well, we got to the point in our discussion where I was able to say, well, look, What is proposed, and the tenders have now gone out for these tests to the various organisations. What's being proposed is a test which has to primarily test the communication, language and literacy and mathematics areas of the early years foundation stage. Actually, at no point is this test intended to consider whether those children have got nappies on, whether those children have got dummies, whether those children can hold a knife and fork, anything about those children's life circumstances. Neither is it actually testing anything to do with the kind of value that you could really add to their lives through a rich and diverse play-based curriculum. What it is interested in is demonstrating a deficit in literacy and numeracy and saying, now plug that gap. Now plug that gap almost to the detriment of everything else and at the expense of everything else.
Absolutely.
Because it got to the point in the discussion where we were able to say, well, look, is not a consequence of these tests being introduced in 2016 simply going to be that you feel under ever greater pressure than you've ever felt before, to accelerate the literacy and the numeracy focused stuff which will be required to increase end of key stage 1 attainment? Is it not ultimately going to be a push down from key stage 1 into reception? Now, our colleagues, weren't really taking that on board. And I think there is a debate here to be had across the teaching profession. I'm sure we'll have it within the NUT and schools up and down the country. These are not, despite the terrible phrasing that they came out with, these are not people with bad intentions, but completely misunderstanding what this test is all about. The test was never really intended with any benefit or advantage to children whatsoever. My notes, needless to say, are in a mess because I've just grabbed them out of the car. But the purpose, quote, the purpose of the reception baseline, this is the government earlier this year, March this year. The purpose of the reception baseline is to support the accountability framework and help assess school effectiveness by providing a score for each child at the start of reception, which reflects their attainment against a predetermined content domain. It remains my favourite phrase of the year, a predetermined content domain, and which will be used as the basis for an accountability measure of the relative progress of a cohort of children through the primary school. Just to be clear, the assessment of a group of children against a predetermined content domain, literacy and maths primarily, has the sole function of measuring the relative progress of a cohort of children and serving as an accountability measure of the school. At no point is there a pedagogical rationale offered, nor any claim that this will benefit any child anywhere in the country. The claim is simply that ultimately we can keep better tabs on teachers' performance through the early years and into key stage 1 if we make sure that they are on track to hit targets which we will establish through a predetermined content domain. It feels less attractive.
Should we just all kind of go and march on Parliament now?
It feels considerably less attractive to colleagues. And of course the motion passed eventually, but that's only because there is a job of work to be done, right, in trying to establish what these tests are for and why they're being introduced. And I suppose my bigger point, my wider point is that the reason these tests are being introduced by this government at this time is they do fit very neatly with a particular neoliberal version of education, agenda for education, which is about ensuring that every child's, in the jargon which we use in university, their employability ultimately is guaranteed by increasing their value as fast and as early as you can. If we can add value to those kids early on, literacy and numeracy, it is intended that, or it's supposed that, we can thereby increase their employability long term. Now, it's a very odd way of looking at 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds to be thinking about their career. Yes, we all aspire for our own children, for the children in our care, for the children in our classes, and so on and so forth, that they are able to forge a way in the world and act in a manner which allows them to make the best of their potential. That said, it's an entirely spurious claim, as I'm sure you've heard from Richard and Jess, entirely spurious claim to say that we can best achieve a return on the state's investment in early education by testing early and testing more. It is simply not the case that we can guarantee that those children will acquire what they need to acquire in order to be more employable and pay back the state through their economic productivity, just to test them quick, just to test them earlier. But there is a kind of weird logic, and it makes sense, that if you test them with an incontrovertible test early on in their life, you've got this baseline against which you can measure the value that you've added. The phrasing put out in the tendering documents are clear. They say things like each assessment item in these tests must require a single, objective, binary decision to be made by the scorer. There is no room in tests of these kind for any sort of ambiguity. It is right or wrong, and on the basis of that right or wrong, we can measure the value of the child at entry. And the logic is impeccable. If you're going to guarantee that return on your investment, you've got to know what you're investing in at the beginning. You've got to say they are this when you pump your money in. So you can demonstrate at the end of Key Stage 1, at the end of Key Stage 2 and on and up, how much you have added in quantifiable terms by your investment. It's what Marcuse called the progressive mathematization of knowledge and experience, starting with the natural sciences and developing to include many aspects of life. It's universal quantification. I think we are united once the arguments have been made and won up and down the country. We in early years, those people in higher education interested in this area, those people working in the unions, we are united in saying the introduction of a reductive maths and English-based baseline test at 4 is a disaster. The question then is simply, what do we do about it? You are sitting in this room and I don't have any better answers than you have, so I want to hear from you and these good people what we're all going to do about it to ensure that the tests planned to be introduced in 2016, and schools can, if they wish to, start them in 2015, can preferably be halted. And if anything is put in place, what is put in place does not operate in the terms in which the current government wishes it to operate through that reductive maths and English format. So I think that's it. that'll do, and you can ask me some questions a bit. Thank you all.